Tony Chicoria. Orthopedic surgeon Tony Chicoria was speaking on a payphone to his mother when he was struck by lightning. He was technically dead before he was brought back to life. Following the accident, he experienced trouble with his memory and felt sluggish, but doctors told him that these things were to be expected after his ordeal. As those symptoms dissipated, however, he began to feel a strange urge. Out of the blue, Chicoria got a sudden urge to listen to piano music. He'd never been interested before, but now he couldn't get enough. He even bought a piano despite not knowing how to play. He began to play the melodies he heard in his head, however, and they were beautiful. He decided to name his first piece the Lightning Sonata. Doctors are unsure how it happened, but Chicoria is happy with his new life and has had several recitals to date. Unnamed woman. After receiving a severe shock from a faulty lamp, one woman claimed she could heat up her hands enough to melt ice. People were understandably skeptical of this claim, so she decided to prove it. She had a photo of herself taken out on a frozen pond to demonstrate her powers. The photo showed her crouched on the ice with her hand on the surface as a circle was melting away. Amazing! Well, it would be if it were actually true anyway. As it turns out, the photo was actually taken by photographer Eliza Razel as a part of a fantasy-based photo series. Nikolai Kryagliachenko. After receiving a massive electric shock, Russian schoolboy Nikolai Kryagliachenko claimed he'd developed magneto-like powers. He'd accidentally leaned against a lamppost with a faulty wire. The next morning, he woke up to find that several coins that had been on his bed were now sticking to his body. As he went about his day, more metallic objects became attached to him. As a lover of comic books, he began to channel his inner X-Man and showed off his newfound talent. Nikolai is hardly the first human magnet to appear, however, as stories of the power have been around since the mid-19th century. Scientists are not convinced, however, saying it's more likely that these people have unusually sticky skin rather than being magnetic. Franco Magnani. After emigrating from Italy to San Francisco in the 1960s, Franco Magnani came down with a frightening fever. He suffered seizures and often became delirious. When he began to recover, Magnani began to recall vivid details of his childhood home, which he had not seen for more than 30 years. He became so engulfed by the memories that he began to paint the scenes he was seeing in his head. Now, back in Italy, he'd been a cook, and in the US, he had been a woodworker. He'd never picked up a paintbrush before in his life. After recovering from that high fever, however, he was suddenly able to paint in great photo-like detail. Painting these memories became an obsession, and doctors believed that the fever triggered temporal lobe epilepsy, which is known to create obsessive personality in some sufferers. Jason Paget. In 2002, Jason Paget was leaving a bar when he was jumped by two men and suffered a concussion. After returning home, he began noticing geometric shapes everywhere he went. For 3 years, he rarely left his house. Eventually, Paget began to draw the shapes he saw. Once he began to venture out more, people noticed that his drawings were fractals, mathematical sets that show a repeating pattern. Paget had always been terrible at math, but now he was excelling. He was also the only person that was able to hand draw them without a tool or stencil. Theories as to what could have caused this change began to circulate. The most popular theory is that the blow to Paget's skull affected the area of the brain that control object boundary formation, which allowed him to see the geometric patterns. Pretty amazing, isn't it? So, now we have to ask, what kind of superpowers would you want to have? Be sure to also tell us why and let us know in the comments below. The best answer gets pinned. Ben Underwood. When he was 2 years old, Ben Underwood was diagnosed with retinal cancer. In order to save his life, his eyes were removed when he was 3. Being unable to see, Ben discovered an alternative way to get around. He began to teach himself to use echolocation, a method of detecting the location of objects by making frequent clicking noises with his tongue and listening for the echo. Using this technique, he was able to get around easily, play football, ride a bike, and run. By the time he was a teenager, Ben was the most proficient human echolocator alive. Sadly, Ben's cancer returned and he died in January 2009 when he was just 16 years old. Anonymous woman. During a family ski trip at an undisclosed hill, a young woman claims an accident changed her life. She had been going too fast and caught the edge of her ski, which sent her flying. She says that she blacked out following the accident, but continued to ski despite feeling dizzy and slightly nauseated. The symptoms didn't let up, so after 2 days, she went to the hospital where she discovered she'd suffered a concussion, dislocated shoulder, and broken collarbone. For weeks following the accident, she began to experience changes in her vision and perception. She was remembering everything she saw in exact detail and was even able to draw perfect diagrams. Fearing something was wrong, she went back to the doctor. For over a year, they were unable to help her, but eventually, after many tests, she was diagnosed with acquired savant syndrome. This condition is extremely rare and only affects 50 known people worldwide. Little is known about the condition, but sufferers tend to exhibit extraordinary skills they never possessed before. Ken Walters. In 1986, Ken Walters was involved in an accident. He broke his back and was bedridden for a year. His luck got worse, however. He was kicked out of his home and suffered 2 heart attacks. By 2005, he'd been jobless for nearly 20 years and was living off the government. Later that year, he suffered a stroke. While in the hospital, he attempted to write a note for one of the nurses but found himself doodling instead of writing. This was an incredibly odd thing for him to do, as he'd never been a doodler. Walters had never been good at art and was an engineer before he was paralyzed. Doctors advised him that it was likely a result of the stroke, as the brain can rewrite itself to avoid the damaged area. He was told the symptoms were likely temporary, but they persisted. His art became more well known, and eventually his drawings drew the attention of Electronic Arts. He began to draw monsters for their games and says he wouldn't change his life for the world. Tommy McHugh. For most of his life, British-born Tommy McHugh was not the nicest man. In fact, many considered him to be one of the biggest a-holes in the UK. He had a bit of a drug problem and a tendency to punch random people who crossed him. One day, he suffered an intense headache and decided to go to the hospital, where doctors told him the bad news. He had a bleed on both sides of his brain from a ruptured aneurysm, and if he didn't get surgery right away, he would die. Once he was cleared to go home, McHugh realized he was speaking in rhyme. This lasted for 3 months before he started seeing strange images. He'd never been creative, but these images compelled him to draw, write, paint, and sculpt. These urges began to take over his every waking hour, so he wrote to doctors to find out why. They believed that the bleeding in his brain caused damage to his frontal lobe. Now, his art is exhibited in many galleries across the UK. In addition to his new creativity, McHugh says he's also become a nicer person. John Sarkin. In 1982, John Sarkin was a chiropractor in South Hamilton, Massachusetts. 6 years later, however, he developed tinnitus, which caused ringing in his ears, as well as hyperacusis and oversensitivity to a certain range of sound. The only way to alleviate his symptoms was to undergo surgery. There were complications, though. Sarkin suffered a cerebellar hemorrhage and a stroke. When he awoke, he was deaf in one ear, his balance was skewed, and his vision was splintered. Doctors advised him that these changes would be permanent, but that his brain would form new connections. Apparently, those new connections were artistic. Sarkin began to draw. His artwork was soon featured in Vanity Fair and several art galleries. Some of his paintings are even worth upwards of $10,000. Getting any ideas from these astounding individuals? Let us know what powers you'd want and why in the comments below. The answer with the most thumbs up will be pinned to the top of the comments and featured in a future video by The Richest. Hard to believe these people actually exist, isn't it? Imagine how many more unbelievable people there are out in the world. Why not check out some of them in our other videos? And remember to check back daily for new content and original classics.